Hello, I'm Heather Garreau-Miller, one of the health promotion specialists here in Edmonton, and today I will be giving you your annual briefing, Hooked on a Feeling, Alcohol, Other Drugs, Gaming, Gambling, and Cannabis Awareness. So I'm just going to put up my slideshow and we will get started. I'd like to begin by reading a disclaimer. The presentation you are about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense, Strengthening the Forces, Health Promotion. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. Before we begin, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. I'd like to give my land acknowledgement through the lens of the land we stand on and the community we work in. Many Indigenous men brought valuable skills with them when they joined the military. Patience, stealth, and marksmanship were well-honed traits for those that had come from communities where hunting was the cornerstone of daily life. These attributes helped many of these soldiers become successful snipers and reconnaissance scouts. Indigenous soldiers earned at least 50 decorations for bravery during the war. Henry Louis Norwest, a Métis from Alberta, and one of the most famous snipers of the entire Canadian Corps, held a divisional sniping record of 115 fatal shots and was awarded the Military Medal and Bar for courage under fire. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. I acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. So let's begin with the big why. People drug, game, and gamble and drink for all kinds of reasons. What reasons do you think of when you think of these things? Why do people drink? Why do people drug? Why do people game and or social media deep dive? Why do they gamble? Well, that because is probably very different for every individual. And maybe many of the reasons that you see listed here may be the reasons that you thought of. Substances and activities like gaming and gambling change the way that we feel, at least momentarily. And people use alcohol and drugs and gaming and gambling for a variety of different reasons. Some people might be using it to relax, to have some kind of enjoyment, to be a part of a group. Maybe they're using it to avoid physical and or psychological pain. Maybe they're using it to experiment just out of a sense of curiosity or a little bit of excitement or even rebellion. They may also be using it to cope with problems, to relieve stress, to overcome boredom. Use is influenced by so many different factors. But most people participate in these activities for the benefits, whether those benefits are perceived and or experienced, not for the potential harm that they can cause. And this applies to both legal and illegal substances, gaming, gambling, and social media usage. Nobody does these things to feel worse. The vast majority of people who participate do not become dependent. However, when we are living in times of high stress, uncertainty, and our schedules have been completely decimated by an experience such as the pandemic, it can impact our choices greatly. So I ask you to ask yourselves, have you noticed a shift in your behavior towards alcohol, drugs, gaming, and or gambling since the pandemic began? Has your use increased The big question is, has it impacted how healthy you were before? Since the lockdowns have ended and we've returned to some kind of normalcy, have you struggled to return or to get back on track with your previous healthier schedule and habits? So I'd like to start just by talking about what those healthy usages might look like. And it's a little bit boring, but we'll get through it and then we'll talk about more of that. Why does this even matter to us? Because not all use is misuse. There is a way in which people can use all of these things, at least the legal ones, to a moderate degree, and in which they can fit into an otherwise healthy life. For some people, it needs to be total abstinence in order to remain healthy, while for others, used within the guidelines that I'm going to show you, can add just a little bit of spice to life. So let's start with the drinking part of it. You can see the limits up on the screen. 10 drinks a week for women, with no more than 2 drinks a day most days. 15 drinks a week for men, with no more than 3 drinks a day most days. And that's based on a drink being 12 ounces of beer, 12 ounces of cider or cooler, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounces of spirits. If you choose to drink alcohol, the key is to be able to keep it at the safest possible level, called low-risk drinking. And it's important to remember that drinking alcohol is not risk-free. Many people enjoy alcohol, and most usually do it safely. And contrary to popular belief, you don't have to drink. Keep in mind that a safe amount of alcohol for one person may be too much for another person. Because of things like age and sex and weight and health history, alcohol can affect people very differently. If you are an adult who doesn't weigh a lot, is younger than 25 years old, or older than 65, or simply isn't used to drinking, that can shift your tolerance quite quickly. So what are all these risks that we're talking about in terms of why do we want you to follow these guidelines? They're quite vast, actually, and differ from one person to the next. But when we look at excessive drinking, it can harm your liver, your pancreas, your nervous system, your heart, and your brain. It can actually increase your risk of high blood pressure, depression, stomach problems, and sexual problems. It's connected to many forms of cancer. It can potentially cause memory loss and your ability to think, to learn, to reason. And it can obviously cause problems at work or at home. It can increase your chance of accidents and or violent behaviors. And it can increase your risk of alcohol dependency and addiction. So taking a look at those drinks that I just showed you on the screen, let's take a look at your drinks. So while you may have only had 3 drinks, was it only 3? If a standard drink of beer is based on that small can or bottle, then having 3 pints or a super can is going to be 4.5 drinks. We also need to consider the strength of the alcohol that we're drinking. With all of those fun craft beers that are out there and the porters and the ales, we need to take into consideration the percentage of alcohol in determining what is reasonable. Having said that, we are not the fun police, and it is okay for most people to have an extra drink on special occasions. Hopefully you also have a DD in place to get you home safely. But drinking those upper limits or having that one extra should happen once in a while, not every day, and probably not every week. It's also a really good idea to consider having days that you consider non-drinking days, and that can help to avoid developing a habit. So moving on, we're going to talk about cannabis use, and we're just going to offer 10 ways in which we can reduce your risk. Cannabis use can impact your behavior, and the capacity to perform your job tasks safely. Being impaired can affect your ability to focus, to make decisions, to follow instructions, and handle equipment safely. Regardless of cannabis being legal, rules around working while impaired from any substance still apply, regardless of whether the substance is legal or not, the reason for its use, or any other circumstance by which you're using it. If you do choose to use cannabis, these are the recommendations to reduce your risk. So the first one may seem extreme to many of you, but is to abstain. It's the simplest way to reduce your risk, especially if you have a history of mental health problems and have not received guidance from a physician in doing so. In addition, we want to think about abstaining if you're drinking alcohol, if you are driving, if you are using machinery or tools, and or you are on a medication that could interact with the cannabis. Next, we'll talk about delay. Delay is about waiting until later in life to try cannabis. The later in life you begin, the lower the risks to your general health. Very simple. Next, start low and go slow. Start with a small amount with low THC and see how it affects you before you try anymore. So the recommendations around this is to look for products with less than 100 milligrams per gram or 10% of THC with equal or higher levels of CBD. When it comes to edibles, we want to think about looking for a product that contains 2.5 milligrams of THC or less. And I think most of us know this, but we need to go very slow on edibles as they kick in much slower. Avoid synthetics. Synthetics like K2 or spice, they can actually cause severe psychoactive effects, and they can potentially even lead to death. Now, this one might come as a bit of a surprise because it's often the way in which people consume cannabis, but avoid smoking it. Cannabis smoke contains much of the same harmful chemicals that are found in tobacco smoke. Although other methods can also come with risk, vaping and edibles can reduce your risk of respiratory illnesses. Another one that maybe comes as a surprise because it's the way that you've always been told to use if you do use is deep inhalations or breath holding is actually not recommended. While you might be doing so to increase the absorption of the good stuff or the psychoactive ingredient, it also increases the intake of the bad stuff, the toxic materials into your lungs. Just as with alcohol, you should also include some no cannabis days. Frequent or intensive use can increase your risk. It can impact brain development, especially in younger users, mental health problems, dependence, impaired driving, poor education outcomes, and increased risk of suicidal thoughts. And let's come back to that dependence piece. Contrary to popular belief, cannabis addiction can be clinically diagnosed and can have a negative impact on a person's life. People can develop a psychological dependence in the same way other addictions develop. Cannabis and cars don't mix. Cannabis impairs cognition, attention, reaction time, and psychomotor control, all of which are crucial for driving. So when your buddy is telling you that he thinks he's a better driver when he's under the influence, it's the influence of the cannabis that is leading them to believe that to be true, because it is simply not true. Special risk populations, who are they? While cannabis is touted by many as a great tool for mental health, we need to use great caution when jumping to this conclusion. A substantial portion of cannabis-related psychosis and potentially other mental health problems occur amongst people who already have a mental health concern or have a family history of mental health concerns. Obviously, pregnant women should abstain to avoid the adverse effects on the fetus or the newborn. And lastly, combining any of these high-risk behaviors is going to further increase your risk. Moving on, we're going to talk about gaming and gambling. Gaming and gambling should be fun ways to entertain ourselves and connect with others. And there are lots of strategies that we can employ to avoid gaming and gambling becoming problematic for us. So let's first take a look at the gaming piece of it. You like to gamble as a form of entertainment? Well, that's great. Being able to stay within the guidelines can help most of us to be able to gamble responsibly. So the first one is to be self-aware. And I think this is a really important piece for us to consider. If you're stressed out or you're upset, we can often be turning towards certain coping strategies. But I would ask you to consider looking for a better way to deal with how you're feeling. So talk to somebody, do something that's active, journal, anything, etc. Okay. Gambling is not a source of income. Any money you put towards gambling should be money that you can afford to lose. If you can't afford to lose it, don't use it. Decide on an amount of time. It's easier for us to while away the hours gambling. That can actually leave a lot of time eaten up that we would want to be spending on other important things in our lives, like our family and our friends, exercise, healthy eating, and even your sleep can start to suffer. Decide on a budget. As we've said, gambling is not a source of income. So if you're going to gamble, choose an amount that you can afford to lose and stay within that amount. When it's gone, it's gone. It's time to pack it in. And balance that gambling with other recreational activities. Make time for other activities that increase your quality of life. Find passions that you enjoy and people that you enjoy being with. And just as we talked about with the alcohol, we really want to consider limiting or avoiding alcohol or other substances, particularly when we are gambling. When we are under the influence of substances, and many of you know this because you've probably made a poor choice under the influence of substances, we tend to make poor choices. And unfortunately, one of those poor choices can be financial loss for us. So moving on, we're going to talk about the gaming piece of it. And you'll see a lot of similarities here, but we're going to talk about it independently. And one of the things I want you to consider when you're listening to these pieces is also to consider not just gaming, because maybe you're not a gamer, but consider all of your social media habits and even those little games that you have on your phone that you carry around with you. So the first one is to think about work or other responsibilities first. Something as simple as making your bed, your meals, doing your housework, getting your workout in before you sit down and start to game or social media dive. Decide on an amount of time and make sure, just as with gambling, you decide on an amount of time that you can reasonably game without interfering with your quality of life. Engage in face-to-face recreational activities. While many of your online friendships can be real and authentic, it's really important that we still have that face-to-face connection with other people. Mix it up. Go disc golfing. Go to the pool hall. You can still engage in gaming and have some fun, but you'll be having real life conversations face-to-face with people. Take breaks. Our bodies were meant to move. Even when we work out daily, if we are sitting for too long, it can lead to a lot of different health consequences, from musculoskeletal pain to a multitude of different chronic health conditions and even compromised mental health. Make sure that you're taking regular movement breaks when you are gaming. Just as with gambling, we want to set an amount of time and turn off that computer as a at a designated time each night. Allow yourself time to decompress and unwind before you hit the hay. We typically, when we're talking about sleep, would be recommending shutting off all of our screens and our technology, even our television, at least 45 minutes before we want to fall asleep. And to that end, prioritize sleep and nutrition ahead of gaming. Staying up all night gaming and either eating easy, heavily processed foods that let you keep gaming is clearly not good for your health. So make healthy eating and quality sleep a priority for you. So we got through that heavy stuff of all of the facts, but why does this even matter? Why should you even care about any of this? Responsible use of alcohol, legal drugs, gaming and gambling can really seem like harmless ways to let off steam, to relax, to have a little bit of fun. And it certainly can be those things, but low risk decisions around these things are of the utmost importance to so many aspects of your life. If we begin down a slippery slope of overconsumption of any of these things, it can have a negative physical, mental, and financial health consequence. It can also impact your pursuit of important goals and even the trajectory of your career. Overconsumption can lead to poor performance at work, lack of motivation, no desire to pursue your goals, and as a result, it can potentially further decline our fragile mental health. So are you still enjoying responsibly? Or are you hooked on a feeling? Not all people use substances, game or gamble, or even among those who do, not all are equally likely to misuse or even become addicted. Many factors influence that slippery slope to misuse and addiction, including developmental, environmental, social, genetic factors, as well as any co-occurring mental disorders. And still, other factors protect us from sliding down that slope. The relative influence of these risks and protective factors varies quite significantly across individuals and across a lifespan. So let's talk about one of the most important factors that can help people to stop sliding down that slippery slope. And you may have heard little hints of it throughout this briefing. One of the most important factors is connection. So I have an interesting example from a research study that was actually done in the 1980s. It was called the Rat Park Experiment. So in this study, they were given the choice between water laced with drugs or pure water. Most often, the rats in the experiment chose drugs. They eventually became addicted, consuming drugs repeatedly until they died. But interestingly enough, another professor, Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology in Vancouver, noted that perhaps the rats resorted to the drugs because they were all alone in the cage with no stimulation whatsoever. So what he did is he put the rats in cages with other rats, toys, tunnels, food. And he noted that the rats in the social situation reacted differently. Some of these rats tried both types of water, but they did not become heavy users of the drug-laced water, and none of them died. Alexander later carried on additional studies with rats and discovered that if you took solitary drug-addicted rats and placed them in a cage with other rats and social stimulation, they no longer heavily used the drug-laced water. Human beings, much like rats, crave connection, bonding, love. When meaningful connection is missing from our lives, an addiction may end up filling that void. When you've started down that slippery slope, it can be very challenging to make a change. whether it's alcohol, drugs, gaming, or gambling. The need they have been attempting to fill is strong, and thinking about changing that may feel overwhelming or even undesirable. If you or someone you know has gone from use to misuse, it can feel embarrassing, shameful, and downright scary to ask for help. We all have things we don't do well. Sorry, that was my dog. I'm at home. Some of us eat too much. Some of us work out too much. Some of us are overly fixated on clean eating. Some of us deep dive into our work to the exclusion of our connection to family and friends. Some of us use alcohol, drugs, game too much, or gamble too much. We all have something. Remember that. We all have work to do on some aspect of our lives. This just happens to be yours. We are all different, but in so many ways, we are all the same. Whether someone is asking you for help or whether you are the one in need of help, be kind. Be kind and remember that we are all in some ways alike. And don't stigmatize yourself or others. So how do you ask for help? If you need help, ask for it in any way that you can. A letter, an email, your doctor, online, on the phone, talk to a friend, a family member, a fellow member, the padre. Starting a conversation is the hardest part. We are not here to tell you that alcohol, legal drugs, gaming and gambling are bad. For many people, they can be healthy and partake in these things. You can't defeat the darkness by keeping it caged inside you. The opposite of addiction is connection. Let others help you. While alcohol, legal drugs, gaming and gambling can be a part of a healthy lifestyle, they also don't have to be. As hard as it might be for some of you to conceive, life can be fun, fulfilling, adventurous, without any and or all of them. Remember that we all have a thing, whether it's alcohol, food, or obsession with work. We all have to get honest with ourselves about these things. Has something shifted in your life? Are you using these things more and more? Get real and ask for help. So I've put up a list of resources. Probably good for every single one of you to take a screenshot of this right now, just to help you in case you or somebody else you know needs it. And this is our contacts. So again, if you'd like to have more information about what we do, if you'd like to connect with us on social media, or you want to see what our upcoming courses are, or any of the online resources that we have created are, you can check us out on the CAF Connection. And that is it for me. Thank you everybody for listening, and have a great day.